Chapter 22. Leaving Clinton. Can you put a price on family? Can you put one on sacrifice? Tonight my thoughts are on all of the ones who are gone. Mom, Dad, Chris, Aaron. They say that when someone dies, they don't truly die if you keep them in your heart. Those words seem so trite, so small and insignificant. War, death, knowing what gunfire sounds like and how it feels to be so damned hungry you think you're gonna die. Those things seem real to me. They aren't some stupid platitude that no one really understands. Not anymore, at least. Jess's journal. When Jess opened her eyes, the sun was sinking, a red-orange ball of heat occupying the horizon to the west. She was disoriented, her mind still foggy with sleep in the heat of the day. A handful of wilted dandelions thrust in her face did not help matters. She jerked back and focused on Tina's grubby face smiling proudly. "I found dinner!" She waved the dandelion, still sporting a clump of dirt, and several terrified ants which were running pell-mell back and forth across the leaves trying to escape their doom. "See, yes, I found dinner!" Jess couldn't help but smile at the child. Grubby face and hopelessly tangled hair notwithstanding, she was an adorable child. "Oh, sweetie, you did. You found dinner. Thank you, Tina." She took the wilted greens from the tiny, nearly black fist and looked around for the others. On a level patch of land, Aaron and David had erected the big tent they had found and were at one edge of it, obviously exchanging heated words. "What are they doing?" She asked it aloud, but hadn't really directed it towards the little girl. "They's arguing," the little girl replied apprehensively. "Brother wants big stripes, and Aaron made small stripes, and then they started yelling." Her face took on a knowing expression. "They's need a nap." As she finished, David walked away from Aaron, huffing and mad. He stomped over and sat down nearby, practically shaking with anger. His face was red and he looked close to tears. Before Jess could utter a word, Jacob woke with a wail of hunger. She busied herself with adjusting layers. She shifted the infant so that his tiny mouth could reach her breast, and he greedily began to nurse. She winced. Her breasts were sore and painful still. When would her boobs get used to feeding this little guy? Aaron came over and flopped onto the ground near Jess and the baby. "Good Lord, strip me naked and tie me to a friggin' anthill. I give up." She snuck a peek at David, who was looking the other way, shoulders stiff and back hunched, desperately trying not to let the tears show. "I think that we are all hungry and need to eat. And as for you, kid, I'm sorry I didn't listen, 'cause you're probably right about the damn stripes, too. You're right about damn near everything else these days." David let out a small but audible sniffle. "Kid, I'm sorry, okay? We'll do it your way, all right? My name's not Kid, it's David. I'm named after my dad." The boy's voice cracked with emotion, despite his best efforts to sound dignified. He was tired, exhausted and hungry and worn out from the late summer heat. He was, after all, only 11. Tina cuddled up to him and patted his hand. "It's okay, brother, it's okay." She looked over at Aaron reproachfully. "You was swearing, that's not nice." Jess grinned at Aaron. "She's right, you know. Be nice or we will strip you naked and tie you to an anthill." Her smile belied the threat, and it seemed contagious. Before long, even David was smiling tentatively through his tears. Aaron looked offended, and then apologized again. "I am sorry, David. Let's stop for now and rustle up some grub for everyone, okay?" The boy wiped his eyes and nose with the back of his hand and just nodded, still unable to speak. He reached for their small stash of canned goods and located a can opener. The group dined on cold pork and beans, some surprisingly tasty Vienna sausages, one for each of them, and a large jar of spiced peaches. Out of politeness, they each tried a wilted dandelion flower after removing the ants, and praised Tina loudly for her efforts. The little girl beamed with pride. As the last of the light died, Aaron and David went back to the tent and finished the painting. The tent was now camouflaged for the forest, and the two returned, speculating on how they could camouflage it for the plains that they would also be crossing through. Their plans were interrupted by the sounds of sporadic gunfire. Both Aaron and Jess's eyes turned to the distance. The shots were coming from the southeast. Shit! Their eyes turned to the tent and recognized it would be akin to a flashing beacon that someone was around. They needed to be hidden, now. In what seemed like seconds, the tent was down. While the girls disassembled, David and Tina ran and gathered personal items, hiding them and doing their best to erase the evidence of their presence from the grassy lawn. The basement of the children's ruined house seemed more than attractive at the moment, despite the dangerous descent over the broken stairs. Jess and Aaron had learned the trick of it in the last 2 weeks. Hug the wall and hope to God the supports didn't break loose. With little words and black terror in Jess and Aaron's eyes, they made their way into the dark, cluttered basement. It was dark outside by now, thank God, and that would hide them better than anything else. Jacob had woken and began to wail as Jess made her way to the bottom of the stairs. "Jesus, Jess, shut him the hell up," Aaron hissed. "They're almost on top of us." She shoved her friend into a dark corner and pulled the remains of a bookcase over as a cover of sorts, then ran to the opposite end of the basement, looking for another dark spot to hide. Tina had already crawled into the depths of the hidey hole, and David's feet disappeared behind her. The gunfire was loud now, and they heard the men yelling to one another as they moved down the deserted street. Jess patted him, making soft, shushing noises, and tried to get him to nurse. The baby would have none of it. Jacob began to wail louder, picking up on her fear and broadcasting it. It was as if she were standing with a megaphone advertising their position. She was terrified of being discovered. It didn't matter that these men couldn't possibly be from the camp that she and Aaron had escaped from. They had guns, and they were soldiers. None of the kids needed to know anything more than that. Their survival was dependent on their adeptness at hiding and scrounging. In this, all four were clearly on the same page. Jess would later learn of the absolute chaos the Western Front had devolved into. There were no organized attacks, no common enemy to fight against. There were simply the ones with guns and the ones without, and a lot of hungry, desperate people on both sides. The troops the children hid from that night were nothing more than a leaderless group of thugs who, after losing their commander and 3/4 of their complement in a skirmish 5 miles to the southeast, were trying to make their way around a larger group of equally starving and desperate men to the north. None of it really mattered, because in 2 weeks' time, every one of the men currently terrifying the kids would be dead after they made the error of engaging a group far larger in size. Jess knew none of this. She only knew that Jacob was picking up on her terror, and that his cries would end them all if she didn't do something fast. Despite her pounding heart and the fear that shot through her like knives, urging her to run in blind panic, she took one deep, calming breath, and then another, and another. Slowly, she willed her body to relax and allowed a sense of peace to envelop her. One hand cupped Jacob's head, and she hummed silently and steadily. She closed her eyes and remembered the weeks spent healing in that quiet cabin in the woods. She pictured that peaceful week spent with old Coop, and the days of the journey along the way to Clinton. The other hand gently held Quincy's muzzle closed. Life wasn't all pain and fear and death. She knew that. She thought of her parents, of Chris and Aaron and her childhood, and smiled at the memories they still brought her. She hummed softly to the infant in her arms, whispering in his ear, "I love you, Jacob. I love you so much." The infant stilled, turned his head and rooted for her breast, whimpering softly now, responding to her change in mood. The pup whined softly, her little body occasionally flinched at the loud explosions of sound. Jess wondered what the little mutt thought of it all. The men passed, exchanging calls, rummaging in the ruined house above, shooting at shadows. They moved on. When it was quiet, Aaron gathered up a blanket and found her way back to Jess, who was half asleep. Jacob snored gently, moist and warm against her. Aaron caressed his tiny head, which was silky soft. She murmured apologies to her friend. "Sorry, Jessie, I didn't mean it. I knew he couldn't help being scared." "It's okay, Ari. It came out all right," Jess replied. "But I think we better head east for a bit. Those guys went north, and we don't want to run into them anytime soon." The children didn't emerge from their hidey hole, except for David poking his head out and whispering goodnight to Aaron, who bedded down close by. A night on a cement floor was a small price to pay for their narrow escape.